On page 92 of your book, you write, could Vermont become a libertarian state, like that proposed by the New Hampshire Free State Project, or maybe a democratic socialist state modeled after Sweden? Those would now, of course, be questions for the people of Vermont to decide. However, at the convention in Montpelier, you suggested that Bernie Sanders could become the leader of an independent Vermont. Does this mean that you favor the democratic socialist Swedish model?
Not necessarily. I guess in terms of my own favorite political models, my two favorite countries are Switzerland and Sweden, two countries that are really diametrically opposed. I mean, Switzerland is probably the most free market, decentralized government among the 20 leading industrial countries in the world. Sweden is a classical democratic socialist, social welfare state. So they're quite different, but they both work. And my take on it is the reason they work is they're both tiny. They're both very, very small, and that's what appeals to me. But in terms of what the government of free Vermont would look like, you're right, as you alluded to earlier, that the people of Vermont would decide that. In my proposing that Bernie Sanders consider playing a major role in leading Vermont out of the Union was not necessarily an endorsement of Bernie Sanders' political philosophy, but rather was chiding him and the entire Vermont congressional delegation, Senator Leahy and Congressman Welch, arguing that they actually represent the biggest challenge to our movement in Vermont at the present time, the challenge to Vermont independence. They and the hundreds of thousands of people who support them, because the supporters of Leahy, Sanders, and Welch, their political philosophy is one in which they know in their heart of hearts that only the United States government can solve all of our problems, failing to see that the United States government is the problem for reasons we've talked about earlier, that it's owned, operated, and controlled by corporate America. And so really I was chiding Bernie Sanders, challenging Bernie Sanders to say, Bernie, you really can't have it both ways. You can't pretend to be representing the views of the people of Vermont and owe your soul to the American empire. I mean, your salary, your perks, your fringe benefits, your bully pulpit, your political clout, which stems from the pork barrel funds that you have to distribute throughout the state, all of these are provided to you by the American empire. And that if you really care about the people of Vermont, you need to cut your ties with the empire. I mean, all three of the members of our delegation claim to be opposed to the war in Iraq. But what are they prepared to do about it? Virtually nothing. Because if they really were opposed to the war in Iraq, they would refuse to support the financing of the war in Iraq. They would vote to cut off any financial aid for military activities in Iraq. They would also not support the budget of the Pentagon. And so this is a blatant example of where their loyalty to the empire kicks in. They tell the people in Vermont, we're opposed to the war in Iraq. Where's the evidence if they really oppose the war? Let's get on with cutting the funding of the Pentagon and eliminating funding for the war in Iraq. And so some have asked, was it tongue-in-cheek, maybe, maybe not, proposal was that Bernie should resign from the U.S. Senate. He should run for governor in 2 years on a single-issue ticket, Vermont independence, and lead Vermont out of the Union.
So, as I understood at the convention, you proposed Bernie would be a good first president for an independent Vermont.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
But he's a politician, and
Is he ever?
I think he has to hedge his bets a little bit. And the majority, Governor Douglas won 55% of the vote, so the majority of Vermonters are not yet convinced that independence is the way to go. And in that situation, isn't Bernie doing pretty much the right thing by doing what he can with what he's got to work with? And maybe the right step would be for someone, maybe in 2 years, Anthony Polina, or someone who would favor, like him, who would favor independence, could win as governor. And then when Bernie and Leahy and see that the people are in favor of independence, then they could lead in that direction. I'm all in favor of Bernie for first president, but I wouldn't want to lose him as senator in Washington if independence doesn't work out. So I would want to hedge the bet and have him stay in the Senate until we actually become independent and get recognized as independent, and then that would be the point to resign.
Well, the view you expressed, Terry, is a prevailing view among, I would say, Vermont progressives and liberal Democrats. It does remind me of, I actually contributed to Bernie's senatorial campaign, and by virtue of that, 2 or 3 years ago, I was invited to a fundraiser. And Bernie was speaking, and he was railing against the U.S. Senate. He was basically saying the U.S. Senate is corrupt to the core, and you know, vintage Bernie Sanders. And so in the Q&A, I stood and said, I have Congressman, he was still in the Congress, and I have 2 questions for you. One is, if the U.S. Senate is as corrupt as you say it is, and I agree that it is, why do you want to be a U.S. Senator? Why do you want to be a part of such a corrupt body? And my second question is, wouldn't it be a lot more fun to be president of your own little democratic republic rather than being simply one of 100 U.S. senators? And he smiled. But so that gets kind of to your issue, which is, I respectfully disagree that I don't really see what the big benefits are to Vermont of having Bernie Sanders and Patrick Leahy in the U.S. Senate. I mean, the image is that they're doing great things for the United States and for Vermont. I mean, Bernie Sanders, you know, runs under the label of progressive or democratic socialist. You know, he's not technically a Democrat or a Republican. What influence does Bernie Sanders? I mean, he gets on a lot of talk shows outside of Vermont, but I don't think he's taken very seriously by anyone outside of Vermont. And so I don't really see the influence that these guys have. And I would come back and say, if they're really loyal to Vermont, they would be taking more overt, maybe not ready to embrace secession, but if they really are opposed to the policies of the empire, you know, they would vote to cut off the funds to Iraq, vote to cut off the funds to the Pentagon. I contend that Leahy, Sanders, and Welch, they want to have it both ways. Their power comes from the fact that the U.S. government butters their bread. They don't want to give up those perks, those benefits, the source of their power, and I don't think they're going to anytime soon.